Welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Geri Simon, a League member and your host. Each week we'll talk about issues that are important to elections. We hope to inspire you to talk to your friends, your family, and coworkers about those same issues. And then when election time comes around, we hope to help you be ready and willing to go vote. Today we are going to talk about voter registration in Douglas County in Nebraska, and with us we have our guest, Valerie Stoj, who's the Public Relations Coordinator for the Douglas County Election Commission. Welcome, Valerie.
It's great to be here, Geri. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about what you do as Public Relations Coordinator.
Certainly, my pleasure. I have the opportunity to work with individuals as they're considering being a candidate for office, answering questions for them, helping them explore various options. Then if they decide to run, I can help them in the office completing the necessary forms, obtaining information perhaps such as voter lists or maps. I answer questions from the public about a wide variety of topics, and I also do a fair amount of data management, working with results and those sorts of things so that people have the information that they need.
Okay. Well, today we're going to focus on voter registration for eligible voters in Douglas County. So could you just tell us in general a little bit about the requirements for elections in Nebraska to register to vote?
Certainly. Well, taking it a step back, the federal government sets broad laws regarding elections, and then they delegate the responsibility for that to each state. So in Nebraska, the Secretary of State is the primary election officer for the state, and so that office sets a number of policies and then works cooperatively with an election official in all 93 counties to carry out those elections. And so in the state statutes, Chapter 33 is the Election Act, and so all elections are conducted in accordance with those statutes. So I would just want viewers to know that if there's a law or a practice that maybe they would like to see changed, the best thing for them to do is contact their representative in the legislature and talk with them about considering a law change.
Okay. Now, in Douglas County, we have an election commission. Is that true in all counties in Nebraska?
It's not. Again, going to statute, if a county has 100,000 or more residents, they're required to have an election commissioner. And then for counties that have between 20,000 and 100,000 residents, they have an option to have an election commissioner. In the smaller counties, that election commissioner would be appointed by their county board of supervisors. For the state-mandated election commissioners, are appointed by the governor.
Okay. So what does our election commission do in Douglas County?
Well, in a broad explanation, we run all the elections for all the political subdivisions in the county. So to do that, we need to, of course, register voters. We need to assist candidates. We need to develop ballots. We need to find polling places and recruit about 2,000 election workers for every countywide election. And then, of course, we need to share the results and put together all the data regarding who voted in the election.
Okay. And my understanding is that Nebraska is unique in that in our election office, we're required to have balance in terms of political party representation and staff. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, certainly for the counties where there is an election commissioner, that person, because they're appointed by the governor, is usually the same political party as the governor. And so in those counties, then we have a chief deputy election commissioner, and that person is of a different party. So if there's a turnover in that position, all the political parties in the county have the opportunity to nominate candidates, and then the election commissioner chooses someone from among those candidates that was nominated.
Okay.
And then in addition to that, any task that's done in the office that involves ballots, whether it's done by election workers or by staff, has at least two people involved, and those two people are of different political affiliations as well. We want to have lots of checks and balances and have everything be above board and no chance of having anything be misappropriated with that.
Okay. So getting down to registering to vote. Who can register to vote?
Certainly. I'm going to check my notes here to make sure I share this appropriately. So the following requirements are: they must be a United States citizen. They must be 18 years or older on or before the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So in a year when there's a general election, they must be 18 by that date. They must live in the state of Nebraska. They must not have been convicted of a felony, or if convicted, parole and probation must have been completed 2 years ago or longer. They must not have been found mentally incompetent, and then the voter registration form includes signing an oath saying that they meet those requirements.
Okay. And you said on the age requirement, can 17-year-olds register to vote?
They can if they're in that unique situation where they'll turn 18 prior to that first Tuesday following the second Monday, but maybe their birthday's not until the summer. So 17-year-olds can actually vote in a primary election in May if, in fact, they'll be 18 by the general election date in November.
Okay. And here in Nebraska, we have our primary, if the general election is November, the primary is in May.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Now, the other thing that's a little different from Nebraska from some other states require voter ID. Do we do that in Nebraska?
We do not. The only time voter ID is required is if you're registering to vote for the first time by mail. So a copy of a driver's license, any number of things will suffice for that. But once someone meets that requirement, there's no voter registration, or no voter identification, required at the polling place. The only time someone would be asked to show ID when they vote is if they registered for the first time by mail and they didn't provide identification. Then the first time they would vote at the polls, they would be asked to show some ID that just verifies who they are. But if someone registers to vote in person, they're their own identification and no ID is needed.
Okay. And do you have any statistics at all on any evidence of fraud that's been in elections in Nebraska?
I can't speak for the whole state, but in Douglas County we haven't had any cases of voter fraud that have been prosecuted in the last 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years.
So it may occur, but it's not something that happens on a frequent basis.
Okay, so it's pretty rare.
Definitely,
it's like, okay.
Definitely.
Okay, and registered voters, how many registered voters do we have in Douglas County?
I think people might be surprised. There's over 321,000 registered voters in Douglas County, so that's the largest number for the whole state. And currently they're pretty well evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. At the time that we're taping this, there's nearly 123,000 Republicans, nearly 120,000 Democrats, 2,266 Libertarians, and there's 76,000 Douglas County residents that are nonpartisan.
Okay. And nonpartisan meaning that they have not chosen a party to affiliate with.
Some people use the term independent. That's not really in the statutes anymore, so that's not a term that we use. But yes, they've chosen not to have an affiliation with one of the political parties.
Okay. And of those, that sounds like a lot of people registered to vote, but what percentage of the population eligible to vote is registered then?
We usually base our calculations off of the census. So the most recent census is 2010. So we've gotten 5 years away from that. At the time that data came out, we extrapolated, and again, this is an estimate, that about 85% of the citizens eligible in Douglas County were registered to vote. So that's a really high number.
That is a high number. And any ideas of getting us closer to 100%?
Well, we really appreciate our partnership with the League of Women Voters that helped to do that. You know, certainly of that number, there's a certain percentage who perhaps have that deemed incompetent to vote. There are some that are felons, so they're not eligible. And then, for whatever reason, there are people that just aren't interested in the voting process and choose not to register at all.
Okay. And when you mentioned someone who's deemed mentally incompetent, what would you need to show that someone wouldn't be allowed to register to vote because of having that category?
It would be a medical professional that would certify some sort of statement. Okay. Usually if there's a person in that sort of a situation, there's a family member or a legal guardian that's involved. Okay. And so that person would help us to perhaps have the information that this person is not legally qualified to vote.
And one of the things that we like to talk about is we register voters, of course, the League of Women Voters, and why it's so important to exercise your right to vote. And what does the Election Commission have to say about what the importance of exercising your right to vote is?
Well, certainly it's our constitutional right, so we want everyone to vote in every election for which they're eligible. I know that Dave Phipps, our election commissioner, has a really interesting philosophy. He would encourage people to vote in every election. Now, many voters would consider that really it's that presidential general. That's when they really cue in. But his philosophy is that the likelihood of you being able to contact the president directly and share your opinion and have that affect law is probably not as likely as if you contact your local city councilman or even the mayor. You're going to have more of a chance to talk with them and have your voice heard. And so therefore those elections for those local offices such as school board and your mayor and those sorts of things are really probably more important. And so we'd like for people to be aware that primary elections are important, those nominating elections, and those elections for the local officials are just as important, if not more so, than the state and national offices.
Okay. And of course, that 4-year presidential election is always in November.
The general
election. And then when you mentioned city council, school boards, are those elections at other times of the year?
Nebraska has statewide elections in even-numbered years. And so for the most part, those elections are connected to the primary and the general. Now, the city of Omaha does things differently. Their home rule charter calls for their elections to be held in the year following presidential elections.
Okay.
So mayor and city council for Omaha are done. The next one will be in 2017, the year following those presidential elections.
Okay.
But for the most part, school boards and public utilities and all those elections are held in conjunction with the presidential and the gubernatorial elections. If there are times when those entities have to have a separate election, and then those are called special elections.
Okay, so that's in case someone would leave office or there'd be an opening in the office unexpectedly?
As far as a resignation, those entities usually have the opportunity to appoint someone temporarily. Mm-hmm. Usually a special election is required if there wants to be a levy override or a bond issue, a change in a charter or a constitution, that sort of thing.
Okay. And the league, of course, likes to tell people that it's so important that every vote truly is important and does count. And when you think about it, their election could result in a tie vote. Mm-hmm. So demonstrating the importance of one single vote, what happens in Douglas County or in Nebraska if we do have a tie? How is the election determined?
Well, taking a step back, there are provisions when recounts are required.
Okay.
Now, Nebraska does voter counting or voter tabulation with electronic equipment, which is far more accurate than humans. And so the margin of error is pretty minimal. There are times, though, when there are recounts, and the automatic recounts are determined in statute, so there would always be a recount. And then if there's still a tie after that, it depends upon the level of the office, but the statute actually provides for the election to be decided by a game of chance. So it literally could be drawing straws, choosing a card, that sort of thing.
Oh my goodness, and who determines what the game of chance would be?
It's at the level that the decision is made, it's a canvassing board, and the canvassing board would make those decisions.
So we could actually flip a coin and decide
Definitely.
the election.
Doesn't happen very often in Douglas County, but I think probably across the state there's probably one of those that occurs in every election cycle when you consider how many races there are.
Well, that's probably the best thing to tell people when they say my vote doesn't matter.
Right.
But, yes, okay. Well, let's move on and talk about the actual registration process for people. What are the different ways that you can register to vote in Douglas County?
Certainly. Well, at the basic level, people need to complete a form. And now we have two options. There's either a paper form or an electronic form, which is a new option in Nebraska. There's a number of ways to acquire a paper form. Of course, people can come to our office and we'll help them fill out that form right on the spot, and we'll enter it in our computer right away. If it's not convenient to come to our office, which is located near 114th and Dodge, they can print one off from our website, and that's votedouglascounty.com. If it's more convenient to go to any Omaha Public Library location, they have the forms there. Voters can fill them out and then just return them to the clerks, and they'll get that form to our office, so they don't even have to worry about postage or anything like that. If people are renewing or getting a new driver's license, they can do it at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And then the last way, well, there's two more ways. One is through certain forms of public assistance in conjunction with applying for those. People can register to vote. And then the last area which the League has a great deal of involvement with is through a deputy registrar at a voter registration drive.
Right. And we do that fairly often
Definitely.
here.
And then there's the new online voting that was authorized by the legislature, and that whole program is coordinated by the Secretary of State's office. And I think there'll be information on this show about how to find that site.
Yes.
What's important is people need to already have a current valid driver's license in Nebraska or a state ID to use that form. And that's because there needs to be a signature online that's accessible to use for that person.
Okay, and you can use that online form if you, let's say you moved, you had to change your address. Can you do that online as well as?
Definitely. The only thing would be if you're changing your name, that needs to be changed with the Department of Motor Vehicles before you use the online system.
Okay. Now, if you live in another county, let's say you live in Sarpy County, can you still come to Douglas County and register to vote?
We use a statewide computer system, but to do the actual entering, you need to be in your own county's office. So if we would have someone come into our office from another county, we would either hand them a paper form and have them complete that, or we could even just direct them to one of the computers in our office and have them do it that way. When it gets close to an election, though, then it's really important to go to your own election commission. The last week of voter registration, people really should go to their own election commission to be sure that their registration is entered or updated so that they're guaranteed to know that they're in the voter registration rolls for the correct county.
And what is the deadline before any given election to be registered?
Good question. There are actually a number of deadlines in lots of different ways. The third Friday before any election is the deadline to register by mail, to have someone other than the voter come to our office and drop off their registration, to register at the DMV, through the library, any of those assistance offices, through the online portal, or through a deputy registrar.
Mm-hmm.
So the third Friday before is really important with that. Then the very next week, ending with the second Friday before the election, that is a time when voters personally can come to their correct county's election commission office and register in person. And so they have that whole week, and on that very last day, that second Friday before the election, we are only that day where all election offices are open until 6 p.m. And so if people absolutely can't get to our office for business hours that typically close at 5, that's one additional day that they can come in later.
Okay. And if someone gets completely confused with all the information, they're looking online and they can find that information online as to what the deadline is.
Definitely.
And they can call your office as well, and you'll help someone determine when is the last date that they can register to
and
vote.
we do a lot of work with local media as well and sending out press releases. So hopefully if they have a TV station or a radio that they're listening to, hopefully the news is giving that information as well.
Okay. And what is the phone number if they wanted to call the election office?
Certainly. It's 402-444-VOTE, which translates to 8683. And we're always happy to take voters' calls, but as you can imagine, the closer we get to an election, the busier our phones get. So people will get the best customer service if they can call us at least 2 or 3 weeks prior to the election. Again, we're always happy to help, but if you can avoid the mass barrage of phone calls, that would be really helpful.
Okay. Then you had mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was that felons can regain their right to vote in Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone has been incarcerated and now they're back in the community, what do they need to do, or what are the requirements to exercise that right to vote again?
Certainly. That's a relatively new law, and we're glad for it because, again, we want people to be able to regain their right to vote. But it's important to know that it doesn't happen automatically. The person has to take the action to re-register to vote. And 2 years has to elapse from the time they've completed all of their responsibilities. So if they've been incarcerated and they've completed any parole obligations, and then 2 years have passed, then they're able to re-register to vote. They don't have to provide any proof, but when they're signing that document, that voter registration application, they're stating that they are eligible to register. And so they're certifying that when they sign that.
Okay. And as far as the voter registration forms, one thing that we hadn't talked about, they're available in 2 languages, is that
Yes.
correct?
Mhm.
English?
English and Spanish.
Okay, so either one.
Mhm.
And then someone who's never registered to vote before might be wondering, what am I going to be asked to put down on that form? So could you just kind of walk us through what kind of information?
Certainly. The first 2 questions are those that really certify someone's eligibility. Are you a United States citizen? And are you 18 currently, or will you be so by the second Tuesday following, or the first Tuesday following the second Monday in November? And then it's just really a series of just general information, name, birth date, city and state of birth, just as an additional form of identification. We do require a driver's license number, a state ID number, or the last 4 digits of someone's social security number. Again, just another form of ID. So for people that have a really common name, we're sure we're working with the right person. Of course, need to have their address. If they want to use a mailing address other than their physical address where they live, they can provide that as well. And then people really need to choose a political party. And currently there's the 4 options in Nebraska, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, or nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan. And again, nonpartisan meaning that you're not choosing any party at all.
Right, and people used to use the term independent for that.
Right, okay. Online registration, you had mentioned, that's begun, that was September 2015, the middle of the month, or more towards the end that started. Do we have any statistics on how many people are using that system right now?
We do, and let me see if I can locate those in my notes here.
Okay.
At the time we're talking, it's been in place about a month, and there's been 2,400 online applications. Of those that have been processed, 390 were new registrants to Nebraska, and about 1,300 were people making updates.
Okay.
So I'd say those are pretty good numbers given that it's not an election year.
And it just started in September,
yes,
so mid-September. So.
And it's good that we can really make sure the system is working before we have an election so that we know that things are working well. The Secretary of State's office shared that things are going well. They're continually looking for ways to improve it, but they're pleased with the progress so far in the first 4 weeks.
Okay, good. Now, when you're registering to vote, are the procedures pretty much the same regardless of which county you go to? Douglas County is pretty much the same. If I go to Sarpy County and I was a Sarpy County resident, would I pretty much have the same experience there?
Certainly should. Again, because the voter registration laws are determined by state statute, they should be consistent throughout the state and in each county. Now, of course, each county may have a different agency that partners with them. For example, in Omaha, it's the Omaha Public Library. If you go to another county, their library system may or may not be involved, or it might be some of the towns in the county and not all of them. But for the most part, all the same deadlines and all the forms and everything should look the same.
Okay. And then let's talk a little bit about voter registration drives. I know
Yes.
that you train, and you always train if a League of Women Voters member wants to be a deputy registrar. We are trained by the office, and there's a training to go through for that. And there are some requirements are there special requirements for anyone to be a deputy registrar? How does that work?
Sure. Well, the term deputy registrar is in state statute. And so again, that's something that's offered to the whole state. So once someone is eligible to be a deputy registrar, they really could help anywhere in the state. And so as you mentioned, people need to go through a training class. They need to be a registered voter, and if they're not at the time they sign up for the class, they can register at the class. And then that certification by attending the class is valid for 2 years. So every 2 years they need to attend a class just to be sure that they're up to date on all the laws and things if anything should change. And then we really appreciate having those folks that are really acting as agents on behalf of our office. Mm-hmm. And so if folks are deputy registrars, they need to keep in mind that they're really representing our office first, regardless of any other organization they might be a part of, such as the League. And they need to be very nonpartisan in their efforts. And to ensure that, there needs to be 2 people at least involved, and they need to be of 2 different political affiliations when they do those drives. And so that just, again, assures that there'll be a balance and that people who are registering aren't feeling pressured to register for any particular political party.
Okay. And again, that's somewhat unique. Is that unique to Nebraska that we do it that way?
I have to admit, I'm not familiar with other states.
Okay.
And we might find that now that online voter registration is an option, that the requirement of deputy registrars might be something that the legislature considers whether it's viable or not in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But presently that's in place, and so we follow those guidelines.
And I know when we've done some voter registration drives recently with the new online ability, we can take a tablet or a laptop computer and help someone do it that way if they prefer to do that rather than use paper.
Right. And I think it's important to just kind of differentiate or help people understand that anyone can hand out voter registration forms at any event. And as long as you're just giving them to people and you're not helping them complete them or answer any questions or promising to return them to our office, that's perfectly fine. But if you are answering questions, giving them advice, offering to make sure the forms come back to our office, that's really when deputy registrars need to be involved.
Okay. And as deputy registrars, we are under a requirement to get those forms back to you within a certain time period, are we not?
Correct. And again, that's set in statute, and it's by 5 p.m. the next business day. So if a drive would be done on a Saturday or Sunday, the deadline would be 5 p.m. the following Monday. Okay. And if they're not returned within that time, the registrations aren't valid. So it's very important that the deputy registrars take that seriously and get those forms submitted in a timely manner.
Okay. And then how does a person know that their registration has gone through and they are registered to vote?
Good question. About a week or so after they're registered, our office will send them a postcard, and that will confirm that they're registered, and it will tell them their polling place.
Okay, good. And they don't need that card when they come to their polling place, so to actually vote, is that correct?
No, that's not required.
Okay, great. So I think we've covered pretty much the everything about the registration process. Is there anything else that you'd like our viewers to know about registering to vote in Douglas County?
Let's see here. I'm trying to think. I guess one thing that's important for people to keep in mind is that if someone has moved from another state and they're registering in Nebraska, that it's important that they cancel their registration in the previous state, because really they shouldn't be registered in more than one state at a time.
Important. Okay, well thank you so much, Valerie, for being here and answering questions. For the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha, I'm Geri Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues and to share the information and discussion with your neighbors and friends. And most important, when election time rolls around, go vote, Omaha.